It is a common misconception that New York City is just solid concrete. In reality, the pavement and asphalt are just a thin skin sitting on top of thousands of layers of history. Archaeology still works in densely urban areas because cities are constantly tearing themselves down and rebuilding. The mechanisms of urban design, combined with a city's unique geography, preserve artifacts right beneath the streets. Beneath the skin of the modern pavement of New York City lies a massive archaeological record that chronicles a journey across 4 distinct eras. Therefore, the prehistory of Native Americans in New York City spans over 13,000 years. During the course of that time, the region was marked by a profound environmental and cultural transformation. As a frozen post-glacial tundra, traveled by small bands of nomadic hunters, evolved into a vibrant, densely populated coastal network of agricultural and maritime villages. Hi, this is Kirk, and I'm your guide. And in this video, we will explore the prehistory of New York City. Around 13,000 to 11,000 BC, massive glaciers covered much of North America and New York City. These glaciers that were once in New York City were once 2,000 feet high, therefore denying humans access to the area. During this time in the New York City area, the Hudson River was a roaring, massive glacial meltwater channel, and the Narrows, which is the body of water between Brooklyn and Staten Island, was a dry land bridge. This land bridge was a primary migration highway for megafauna. In the early 20th century, dredging ships working in the deep waters of the New York Harbor and off the coast of Long Island repeatedly dragged up fossilized mastodon and mammoth teeth from the ocean floor. Between around 11,000 BC to 8,000 BC, human presence in the area of what is now New York City began in a stark, subarctic landscape. As the Wisconsin ice sheet retreated north, it left behind a barren tundra of spruce trees, marshes, and high rocky ridges. Because global sea levels were significantly lower, the Atlantic coastline sat miles farther out. The islands and boroughs we recognize today did not yet exist. They were connected landmasses looking out over massive carved-out valleys. The first humans to enter this landscape were small, highly mobile bands of 20 to 50 nomadic hunters, tracking late Pleistocene megafauna. The earliest Paleo-Indians also weren't just hunting on the islands of New York City. They were hunting in the valleys beneath today's harbor shipping lanes. Because of the highly acidic glacial soil, no human skeletal remains survived from this era. The bones of these first travelers dissolved millennia ago. However, their presence is permanently locked in stone. The Ward's Point archaeological site is located at the southern tip of what is today Staten Island. This high-ground peninsula was an ideal lookout. Excavators unearthed the city's earliest stone scraping tools and weapon tips at the site. This proved that Paleo-Indians used the site to monitor migrating herds in the valleys below. A nomadic trade network existed across the region, which facilitated the spread of a unique point known as the Clovis Point. Scattered across the region, archaeologists have recovered pristine, fluted Clovis points engineered to take down large game like mastodons and caribou. Many of these points were crafted from gray-green chert, a stone native to the mid-Hudson Valley. This reveals that even the earliest New Yorkers traveled or traded across immense distances along the Hudson River corridor. As the climate warmed dramatically, the environment shifted. The tundra died out, replaced by massive oak, chestnut, and hickory forests. Melting glaciers caused sea levels to surge, flooding the low-lying plains. This geological shift created New York Harbor, isolated Manhattan, and formed Long Island. Megafauna went extinct, forcing humans to adapt to a highly localized, diverse ecosystem. Populations grew, and bands became semi-nomadic. They moved predictably between seasonal base camps to harvest changing resources, relying heavily on white-tailed deer, wild turkeys, nuts, and berries. Crucially, the newly formed harbor introduced saltwater oysters, clams, and marine life to the regional diet. As modern infrastructure expanded across Totenville, workers and early archaeologists found heavy stone tools at the Satterley Street site on Staten Island, dating back to around 6000 BC. These included stone gouges, grooved axes for woodworking, and notched stone net sinkers used to weigh down large fishing nets in the Raritan Bay. Deep beneath the soil of College Point in Queens, researchers extracted a single perfectly intact 6,000-year-old stone spear point. Now preserved in the New York City Archaeological Repository, this late archaic weapon point tells a story of a hunter stalking game along the ancient salt marshes of the East River. While most famous for its later history, the earliest layers of human activity at the northern tip of Manhattan date to around 6,000 years ago. Transient hunters began using the natural rock shelters and caves as temporary base camps while harvesting the river valleys. The time frame between 1000 BC and 1609 AD represents the peak of indigenous cultural, artistic, and social complexity before European contact. Over these centuries, the Munsee-speaking Lenape people established themselves as the caretakers of Lenape-Hoking, which encompassed all of modern New York City. Society shifted from nomadic wandering to settled, permanent coastal villages, organized around matrilineal clans. Technological revolutions defined this era. The bow and arrow replaced the spear thrower, and clay pottery vessels replaced heavy stone bowls, allowing for efficient cooking and food storage. The Orient culture dominated the transition between the archaic and woodland periods in the New York City, Long Island area. They date to between 1000 BC and 500 BC. They are one of the most mysterious and deeply spiritual prehistoric cultures in the entire mid-Atlantic region, and are named after Orient Point at the eastern tip of Long Island, where its defining archaeological sites were first excavated in the 1930s. The culture marks the transition between nomadic hunting and the highly organized spiritual societies that would become the Lenape. The Orient people lived in a rapidly changing environment. The post-glacial sea levels had finally stabilized, creating the extensive salt marshes, estuaries, and bays of modern New York City and Long Island. Unlike earlier inland hunters, the Orient people were intensely focused on the water. They were semi-nomadic, moving along the coastlines of Jamaica Bay, Staten Island, and Long Island in large dugout canoes. They were the region's first true masters of coastal foraging. They survived heavily on oysters, hard-shell clams, migratory waterfowl, and marine fish, which they caught using large woven nets weighted down by notched stone net sinkers. They supplemented this with white-tailed deer and seasonal harvests of hickory nuts and acorns. Before the widespread invention of clay pottery in New York, the Orient culture engineered a brilliant way to cook liquids over open flame. However, it was a tedious, indirect process. Prehistoric humans across North America relied on skin bags, bark baskets, or hollowed-out wooden trows. Because these organic materials would instantly catch fire and burn if placed directly over a flame, humans had to use a technique called stone boiling. To boil a simple venison stew or hickory nut soup using traditional methods, one first filled a flammable wood or bark container with cold water and raw food. Then one built a massive fire nearby and heated dozens of river rocks until they were glowing red hot. Using wooden tongs, one lifted a hot rock out of the fire, rinsed off the ash, and dropped it directly into the cold water. The rock would hiss, crack, and transfer its heat. As soon as it cooled down, one pulled it out and dropped a fresh hot rock in. This process was exhausting, dangerous, ruined the taste of the food with ash and grit, and required constant manual labor. Around 1500 BC to 1000 BC, the artisans of the Orient culture engineered a massive technological leap by introducing soapstone vessels. This was the ancient equivalent of transitioning from a leather water bag to a cast iron Dutch oven. Soapstone possesses unique chemical and physical properties that made direct fire cooking possible for the first time in human history. Soapstone, however, is a metamorphic rock composed primarily of talc. It has a unique, densely interlocking crystalline structure that allows it to expand and contract evenly. It can be placed directly into the heart of a roaring 1000-degree Fahrenheit fire without cracking. Soapstone has a high specific heat capacity. It absorbs heat very slowly, but once it gets hot, it holds onto that thermal energy like a battery. An Orient culture cook could place a soapstone bowl directly onto the hot coals of a hearth. The stone would slowly absorb the heat, bringing the liquid inside to a gentle, steady, uniform boil, keeping the food hot for hours after the fire went out. Soapstone is incredibly soft, therefore it can be easily scratched and carved with nothing more than harder chert stone picks, beaver teeth, or wooden scrapers. This engineering breakthrough was so effective that it fundamentally changed the human relationship with food, nutrition, and settlement in the New York region. It allowed for the slow simmering of tough meats, bone marrow extraction, and the rendering of nut oils, vastly increasing the caloric intake of the community. This technological zenith lasted for centuries until the Orient culture gradually discovered how to replicate these exact shapes using a lighter, more abundant material. Clay pottery fired with crushed soapstone grit inside it to prevent cracking. Soapstone does not naturally occur on Long Island or coastal New York City. To get it, the Orient people traveled inland to massive quarries in Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Westchester County. They used heavy stone picks to chisel out large blocks of the soft rock. What makes the Orient culture truly famous among archaeologists is their elaborate, highly formalized mortuary complex, often referred to as the Red Ochre cult. Their funerals were not simple burials. They were massive, community-wide spiritual events. The Orient people did not bury their dead near their coastal fishing camps. Instead, they traveled to the highest, most dramatic hills overlooking the ocean, such as Sugarloaf Hill. They dug massive communal burial pits on these hilltop summits. Before placing the remains inside, the community lined the entire pit with fires to ritually purify the earth. They buried cremated bones or bundled skeletons and completely saturated them in thousands of pounds of red ochre. The brilliant blood-red powder completely coated the graves, serving as a powerful symbolic metaphor for blood, vitality, rebirth, and the setting sun. The most haunting aspect of these burials involved their prized soapstone bowls. The Orient people believed that inanimate objects possessed a spiritual life force, or manitou, just like humans. When a person died, their family would take a beautifully crafted soapstone bowl, which had taken weeks of grueling manual labor to carve, and intentionally smash a hole directly through the bottom of it. These systematically killed bowls were then laid inside the red ochre pit alongside the dead, accompanied by finely crafted stone points, fire-making kits, and meat offerings. By breaking the physical body of the bowl, they released its spirit, so the deceased could continue to cook and eat in the afterlife. The Orient culture completely shatters the stereotype that prehistoric Native Americans lived simple, unrefined lives. It shows that 3,000 years ago, New Yorkers were driving a regional maritime economy, trading across the Long Island Sound for advanced cooking technology, and practicing deeply complex, emotional religious rituals to honor their dead. At sites like Sugarloaf Hill, bodies were cremated or buried in large communal pits on the highest hills overlooking the water. The bones were then completely covered in brilliant red ochre, which symbolized blood, rebirth, and the sunset. Inwood Hill Park is a public park located at the absolute northern tip of Manhattan Island. It is widely famous among historians because it contains the last remaining old-growth primeval forests and natural salt marshes left in Manhattan. Famous archaeological excavations took place directly inside the park's boundaries and along its immediate borders near modern-day Seaman Avenue. Unlike the rest of Manhattan, which was flattened, blasted with dynamite, and paved over into a flat grid system during the 19th century, Inwood's geography was saved by its extreme terrain. The park is filled with massive dramatic formations of Manhattan schist rock and glacial boulders. These rocks form natural caves and rock shelters. These steep, rocky cliffs were too difficult for 19th century developers to easily build houses on. The land was left completely wild. The ancient Lenape hearth sites, shell heaps, and living layers remained safely buried under layers of forest soil until archaeologists went into the woods to excavate them between the 1890s and 1920s. The archaeologists systematically excavated the natural rock shelters in northern Manhattan and found evidence of human presence spanning from 6,000 years ago all the way up to the historical era in 1609 AD. Outside the caves, they documented massive shell middens, ancient trash heaps consisting of millions of discarded oyster shells stretching over multiple acres that dated back to between 1,000 to 2,000 years ago. Just outside the park's modern boundary, construction workers broke into an intact, late woodland village cemetery. The well-preserved skeletal remains of a Lenape man, woman, and a child were found. They had been buried wrapped in traditional woven mats, surrounded by beautifully decorated geometric pressed pottery and everyday tools meant for the afterlife. All the remains dated to between 400 to 1,000 years ago. Located in Totemville on Staten Island, the most concentrated significant prehistoric cemetery in the entire metropolitan region sits within Conference House Park, an indigenous site historically known as the Burial Ridge. During excavations for the foundation of a home on Satterley Street between 1858 and the early 1900s, workers struck a cluster of human skulls. Subsequent professional and amateur digs uncovered over 100 Native American skeletons, which were later dated to between 1000 BC and 1600 AD. The remains told a vivid story of prehistoric life and death. While many were buried peacefully in a sitting position facing west, several skeletons were found with stone arrow points still embedded directly into their ribs, spines, and pelvic bones, offering stark archaeological proof of ancient intertribal warfare or territorial clashes. Further east, the shores of Queens supported flourishing coastal communities. In 1934, during construction at Graham Court in College Point, workers unearthed a prehistoric pit. Archaeologists documented an intimate, double human burial that was dated to between 1000 AD and 1300 AD. Two individuals had been carefully interred together within a pit that had originally served as an ancient fire hearth, accompanied by local pottery fragments. Just a few yards away, archaeologists uncovered a 1,000-year-old companion dog burial. The dog had been laid to rest intentionally by its owner. While its skull was missing, the careful arrangement of the skeletal remains proved the deep spiritual and emotional bond the Lenape shared with their domesticated animals. Around 1000 AD, Three Sisters agriculture, consisting of corn, beans, and squash, had arrived, allowing the Lenape to cultivate rich soils alongside the city's miles-wide coastal oyster beds. While popular history treats wampum, which are beads made from white whelk and purple clamshells, as a form of Native American money used to buy things from Europeans, its prehistoric function was deeply spiritual and political, acting as a record of treaties and laws. The waters surrounding New York City, specifically Jamaica Bay, the East River, and the Long Island Sound, had the highest concentration of hard-shell clams in North America. Using strictly stone drills and abrasive quartz sand, coastal Algonquin and Munsee Lenape artisans painstakingly chipped, drilled, and smoothed shells into uniform cylindrical beads. The New York City region was essentially the Federal Reserve of the prehistoric Northeast. Upstate tribes like the Iroquois had to trade heavily with the coastal Lenape just to acquire the precious purple wampum needed to ratify their diplomatic treaties. By the early 1600s, roughly 15,000 to 20,000 Lenape lived in the wider lower Hudson Valley, with distinct bands occupying the immediate New York City area. These bands engineered an expansive network of footpaths through the dense forests, including the Wecquaesgeck Trail, the precise path that would later be paved over to become Broadway. The prehistoric era ended abruptly in September 1609 AD, when Henry Hudson anchored the Half Moon in New York Bay. He documented dense smoke rising from village fires along the coastlines. Within a few generations of this contact, European diseases, the Dutch fur trade, and devastating conflicts like Willem Kief's War shattered these communities. The villages were abandoned, the shell heaps were built over, and the ancestral graves were covered by the foundations of the global metropolis we see today.